And we're back. I hope I'm not freezing. Part three. So yeah, getting back to my thought. Yeah, the 1980s, a lot of things would just fly, but there were a number of people who did um, sue him because of discriminatory practices that for some reason he kept pushing for that whole wanting to be upscale, wanted to be super classy, okay, wanted to keep it all kind of Caucasian. And from what we see, and again, this could be augmented for creative license, for dramatic effect, but we see that at least Nick was a little bit more on the progressive side. And, him being um, gay, he wanted a more inclusive kind of club. So when he was originally part of the original staff and getting all the hunky guys together and doing the choreography, he wanted more of a multi-colored multi-ethnic kind of grouping than say Steve. Steve was questioning everything, like, oh, he's black, and even with the concept of the calendar, which he would go on to do very well with calendars of advertising all the dancers from the the burlesque show in his club in LA. His most known dancer, which again I don't necessarily think that all of these people, there were probably amalgamations, a mixture of like people who actually worked at the club, but they weren't exactly like, I don't think that he had a dancer named Otis, but I think it was like a number of other dancers that may have been faithful to the original staff that felt some kind of way because they were constantly ousted. I mean, they were a hit in the club with the ladies, but he would refuse to kind of advertise or have a inclusive crowding in his club. So Otis is the most well, endowed and maybe most popular dancer in the whole grouping because Otis, or the character of Otis, had training, had dance training, had a more of an actor background, and can I say segue here in stating the incredible soundtrack that they got for this show. My God, it is such a great selection of 70s, 80s, maybe even start of 90s. My God, all the music that was used and was like licensed to the show. Kudos. Like, it really gave you like a mixtape feeling of all the good stuff, like musicality that's just not. And it went and it complemented perfectly with the dancing that we saw in the show. But yeah, and we also see the introduction of Irene Banerjee, his wife, and how they met. And I thought it was so adorable. Whether they really met like this, I don't know. But their nerdy kind of flirting that they have, because she's an accountant and he's really into numbers. He's definitely a numbers guy. So they would kind of like flirt with each other when it came to like, if you do this, you can save this kind of percentage and you can save these kind of cover costs and whatever, and that it would naturally bloom and blossom into a love affair where they would marry and have children. Also, I loved Denise. I mean, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I just get a feeling that they didn't use these people's real likeness and names because they probably weren't okay with co-signing with this interpretation of them. So they kind of made like nods or instances of who they could have been in these people's lives. We definitely stayed true to Nick Denoya and Steve Banerjee, but the character of Denise, I think, was influenced by, I believe her name's Candace Mayeron, and so she was like Nick Denoya's like right hand, and they were very close. You can also see that when, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, that yes, Steve was the culprit behind, the mastermind behind Nick DeNoya's murder. When he was caught, and was about to be sentenced, she was there, like she wanted to see like vindication for her friend, and that didn't come. And we'll get to that. So, moving forward. Oops, hold on a second. Hold on. But we see how integral Denise was to the staffing because whether true or not, and I think she may have been. I mean, not in the sense like we see in terms of Denise, and I don't necessarily think that she was the creator of the tearaway pants, but that's why they bring her on board. Aside from the fact that she is a real big fan and loves how it's a flip on femininity, and feminine and women are now in the controller seat when it comes to their sexuality, and so she wanted to desperately be a part of this staff, and she gets it. She's able to court for Nick, and is able to get on staff. So we see these four brilliant people: costumer, accountant, creator, and proprietor and entrepreneur in Steve, and then the choreography and the creative perspective of the show. Like all of that was essential to make that club and that essentially that show a success. But unfortunately, Steve is a micromanaging kind of person that needs to like eyeball everything and wants desperately to have full credit of everything, which I get it. I get it. That was his baby. So he just didn't. The problem with him is just that he had like serious issues when it came to competitors, was not anticipating that people would try to emulate or copy, and it didn't sit well with him. He just thought that's money. That's money that you're taking out of his mouth or away from his family. He was going to fight tooth and nail to kind of keep. It was almost to the point of lunacy for him to have thought that he was going to be the only game in town. You know, like look for as a perfect example. And when it comes to fast food, for heaven's sake, you know, Popeyes, Chick-fil-A, none of these places I'm sponsoring, but I'm just saying, like, they all do Kentucky Fried Chicken. They all do chicken. They just do a variety, and they bring their own essence to the menu. But when it comes to Steve, that's not a concept that sat well with him, in the sense that, of course, he would then recruit his henchmen and rather dummy of his his Ray Cologne. Ray Cologne is the person that we see, at least in the show, constantly in awe of him and wanting to impress him and keep him happy. He's the handyman, which later I found out doing research, he was like a former police officer. I think he has some kind of background in law enforcement, but some reason has shady practices on the side and used to help out the mafia. And of course, again, they go into so many other layers that they didn't necessarily get to touch in this show. That's why I say please watch the documentary. The docu-series is based on the book and that would influence the show. Secrets of the Chippendale murders. But because we see how the mafia was also involved, and that's why also people were perplexed as to why all of a sudden Nick was off the way he was. But we are introduced to that, and what I will say though, the character of Irene just played beautifully by Annalee Ashford. She is so multifaceted. I will say she has worked in Broadway, and she was also in the series. She was in the FX series, also streaming on Hulu, and I also reviewed Impeachment, American Crime Story. She played Paula Jones, and she did a brilliant job doing her as well, like portraying her. So just goes to show she's very like multifaceted, and I loved her in this. I mean, we don't necessarily have a real footing, not even the docuseries, how much Irene played a role in the club, but you have to assume that she must have been privy to everything. And it allowed for a creative license. And then there is an instance that I say I love how 70s it got in this show, because there's a scene where Steve wants to impress his wife and has messed up so much that gets her this incredibly beautiful piece of jewelry, and I think it's ruby encrusted diamond necklace. And the lady that works in the jewelry shop, if you haven't clocked it, here's a little tidbit, played by Donna Piscal. And if you know her name sounds familiar. Saturday Night Fever, y'all. And so to see, I knew I clocked her. I said, why does her face look familiar? And so there you have your little trivial pursuit. She's in that episode. And I loved her. I just love seeing her. I was like, oh, yes. But anyway, and aside from her, we also have an introduction of Nick DeNoya's partner, which I don't know if he necessarily was the backer for the New York branch of Chippendales, and they would go on and merge to or move on to greener pastures and trying to bring Chippendales to New York, which I think it did successfully well there, because it went from a little small club in LA to a much more grander scale, and definitely when it comes to production value in New York. And of course, our backer here is played by Andrew Reynolds, playing Bradford Barton. And for a minute there, I thought, what a great reunion, because we have Andrew and we have Ramen de la Jesus. And if you haven't watched Boys in the Club, wait, I'm sorry, hold on. I'm sorry, I stand corrected. The Boys in the Band, the 2022 film, an adaptation from the play. Ryan Murphy's baby. It's on Netflix. Oh my God, they're just so beautiful to look at. Not only because of they're beautiful, but also because they're incredibly talented. And I've always said about, hold on a second, I've always said about Andrew, he's just so beautiful to look at. And I've said, where is the biopic for George Michael? Because he's a dead ringer for George Michael. Nonetheless, there's a scene where we're introduced to him in a club where Nick DeNoia is trying to get backing, and they laugh at him. He was going to do some other form of name for his club. I think it was like mail service or something like that. And they laughed in his face. Sorry. But we're segued into Andrew's singing, or Bradford singing. He sings beautiful. I'm telling you. I want to see a George Michael biopic when it comes to and he would be perfect. But he sings so beautifully. And then, of course, we see a sexy romp between them, and then we see how he becomes the backer. In real life, I think Nick DeNoya's personal life was very kept under wraps. Perhaps Candace may have known, his right hand may have known, but she says in the docuseries that she wasn't really too involved in his personal life like we see in the show. And I believe his real life partner, which became a suspect. I mean, I'm telling you, it was a whole full-on investigation. I believe he was French or something, but nonetheless, I mean, if you're gonna watch it, just watch it for the entertainment value, and you will be in awe. But you see how they are able to do successfully in New York, something that desperately gets under Steve's skin, especially because they were fighting over something that was supposed to be like Frankenstein.